Good evening, I'm Ces Oreña-Drilon.
I'm Pauline Verzosa.
And I'm Shawn Yao.
The big stories tonight. Senator Bato de la Rosa is covering all grounds to keep his ICC warrant at bay, even imploring President Marcos not to send him to detention in The Hague.
And another coup is supposedly brewing at the Senate, barely one day after a fresh leadership shakeup there, and just as the upper chamber sets to tackle the Duterte impeachment case.
And over at the lower house, 11 members have been selected to stand as prosecutors in the historic impeachment trial of Vice President Sara Duterte.
Ano po ba yung protection na pwedeng ibigay ng Pangulo kay Senator Bato if there is?
Kapag kung naaresto man po siya, kung maaresto man po siya, lahat ng karapatan bilang isang akusado ay ibibigay po sa kanya.
Tao lang ako. Hindi ako robot. Hindi ako makina. Tao lang ako. May appeal is sincere to the President. Huwag niya akong ipadala sa
The PNP says there is still no official order to arrest Senator Bato de la Rosa and bring him to the International Criminal Court. De la Rosa, who remains holed up at the Senate, is now exhausting all possible means to prevent his arrest, going as far as asking protection from President Marcos himself. Mobile journalist Merimon Reyes with tonight's big story.
Sa ngayon po, nilinaw natin sa Director ng Legal Service, hindi pa po nagko-convene ang NCB-PCTC kaugnay ng pag-implement ng ICC warrant po. Meaning po, wala pang specific na direct na kautusan sa Philippine National Police para po siya ay arrest.
No order yet to arrest Senator Bato de la Rosa. This was the PNP stand on the former PNP chief turned lawmaker who is currently seeking refuge at the upper chamber building. That's after NBI agents tried to arrest him on Monday, May 11. The NBI, together with former Senator Antonio Trillanes, were carrying an order from the International Criminal Court ordering De La Rosa's arrest as a co-perpetrator in the crimes against humanity case of former President Rodrigo Duterte. The Philippine National Police, however, said the local bureau of the International Criminal Police Organization, or Interpol, has yet to coordinate with them regarding the arrest warrant against De La Rosa, which the police force said is ready to implement once it comes out.
Ang CIDG ang pangunahing unit ng Philippine National Police na sinasabi natin mangunguna doon sa contingency plan na i-implement natin. So handang-handa naman ang Philippine National Police, lalo na po yung ating CIDG personnel, na kung sakasakaling maitap na sila ng NCB-PCTC na implement yung ICC warrant at ito ipapatupad at sila handang-handa naman.
Asked whether the PNP had deferred to the NBI in arresting De La Rosa, this was Tuanyo's reply.
Na hindi na pinaiubaya sa ibang agency yung pag-aresto po kay Senator Bato de la Rosa.
The PNP spokesperson further added that the warrant for De La Rosa's arrest may be implemented in two ways. The first option, Tuanyo said, is extradition. The second option is direct surrender under Republic Act 9851 or the Philippine Act on Crimes Against International Humanitarian Law, Genocide, and other crimes against humanity. The NCB-PCTC would then task the Department of Justice, the Department of Foreign Affairs, the PNP, and the NBI with implementing the directive, which Tuanyo said is yet to happen. So the question now, can Bato actually just leave the Senate? Well, based on the PNP's update, he can. But the senator remains holed up in the Senate. He actually spent the night there after his encounter with the NBI on Monday.
Hindi kayo nakatulog po. Sir, bakit? Are you worried kaya hindi kayo nakakatulog?
Currently, De La Rosa's camp is exhausting all legal remedies to prevent his arrest. There is a petition filed before the Supreme Court where De La Rosa is seeking protection from the ICC warrant. His lawyers continue to argue that only a local court can issue a warrant for the senator. The SC, they say, needs to clarify this.
It is very important so that the tension would be at least stopped or at least lessened. So that while the petition is, the main petition is still being deliberated, there is a TRO that will be issued hopefully, and that would stop the PNP and other government agencies.
The country's legal experts have also given their 2 cents on De La Rosa's use of his status as a sitting senator to evade arrest. They maintain that a lawmaker's immunity from arrest is only good for cases carrying a maximum penalty of 6 years or less and when Congress is in session. Former Integrated Bar President Domingo Cayosa says De La Rosa's only option is to surrender.
Kung sakasakaling ikaw ay naparatangan after due process at meron kang warrant of arrest, di ba dapat law-abiding ka? Lawmaker ka, huwag kang maging lawbreaker.
Senate President Alan Peter Cayetano maintains that De La Rosa will continue to have the Senate's protection unless a local court issues a warrant for his arrest. This is why De La Rosa is determined to fight his impending capture. Senator Bato reiterated that he is willing to face the charges against him, but in a Philippine court.
Kahit sino, tanungin natin sino Pilipino gusto gano'ng mangyari. We will exhaust all available means, legal means. Kailangan gawin natin lahat para hindi na tayo madala doon sa daig.
An emotional De La Rosa even went as far as to ask President Bongbong Marcos not to surrender him to the ICC.
Hindi lang para sa akin, kundi para na rin sa lahat ng mga Pilipino na malagay sa ganitong sitwasyon. Tao lang ako. Hindi ako robot. Hindi ako makina. Tao lang ako. May appeal is sincere to the President. Huwag niya akong ipadala sa dahil. Kung meron akong nanagutan, panagutan ko dito sa ating local court. Huwag doon sa Banyaga.
Kapatid mobile journalist Mary Monreyes, we are One News.
The palace had a simple reply to Senator Bato de la Rosa's appeal to President Marcos. Palace Press Officer Claire Castro said all accused individuals will be treated equally in accordance with the law.
Maski naman po yung mga EJK victims ay humihingi rin po ng proteksyon sa gobyerno. So, ang akusadong katulad ni Senator Bato ay humingi ng proteksyon. Lahat naman po ay bibigyan ng proteksyon na naaayon sa batas.
When asked as to what kind of protection that the president could extend to De La Rosa, Castro had this to say.
Ano po ba yung protection na pwedeng ibigay ng Pangulo kay Senator Bato if there is?
Kung naaresto man po siya, kung maaresto man po siya, lahat ng karapatan bilang isang akusado ay ibibigay po sa kanya.
Undersecretary Castro also dismissed De La Rosa's statement that President Marcos could also face charges or arrest after leaving office, and that allegedly includes a possible surrender to the International Criminal Court as well.
Sana tinanong niyo muna kung anong kaso, kasi kung pag-uusapan natin kung madadala siya sa dahig, that's definitely impossible. Kasi ang Pangulo ay hindi nag-commit ng EJK.
Former Senate President Tito Soto and 4 other senators from the minority have filed a resolution urging Senator Bato de la Rosa to turn himself in to authorities. The resolution was co-sponsored by Senators Ping Lacson, Kiko Pangilinan, Rizwa Ontiveros, and Bam Aquino. The resolution is asking De La Rosa to voluntarily surrender to proper authorities and seek judicial remedies in accordance with the Constitution and applicable laws and rules. The resolution states that parliamentary immunity and privilege from arrest are limited to offenses punishable by not more than 6 years of imprisonment. De La Rosa is currently taking refuge at his Senate office after the ICC confirmed that it has ordered the senator's arrest. The resolution highlights past cases of voluntary surrender and judicial submission by former senators who likewise face charges and arrest. Now, these were Juan Ponce Enrile, Laila De Lima, and Sonny Trillanes.
Now, there are a lot of legal interpretations on the impending ICC arrest of Senator Bato de la Rosa. Let's bring another voice in. Storycon anchor Ed Lingao joins us now. You've talked to different legal luminaries, including the counsel of Senator de la Rosa. So there's that resolution asking him to turn himself in, but what does Attorney Torion say?
They stand by the same position that they had as of March 2025, yung panahon ni dating Pangulong Duterte when he was brought to The Hague, which is that basically walang authority ang gobyerno and it's unconstitutional for the government to continue cooperating with the ICC. They've never changed that from that position. In fact, what they filed yesterday, the Office of Torion, is the same thing that they filed on March 11, 2025.
Right, but he said it's justiciable now.
It's justiciable now because si Bato may arrest warrant. But mind you, same thing, TRO, with the Supreme Court. Ang dagdag kay Duterte din was a habeas corpus petition. Now, it's interesting, number one, Duterte's case, ang TRO was rejected after a few days. A habeas corpus petition is still pending after a year and 2 months. The only thing that the Supreme Court ever did was consolidate the petitions of Kitty Duterte, Paul Duterte, and Base Duterte, and Bato, and to order the government to respond to the allegations. But that was all. So for example, ang point of view ni San Bernardino, si Father Angelo Aquino, was that kung gayang Supreme Court, ang tingin niya hindi ganun ka urgent yung kaso, naghintay ng isang taon at 2 buwan, that's a message already. That's already, in a way, the decision that is not going to move forward. So that might be a cue daw, as far as Father Aquino is concerned, for this particular case as well.
So, is that the view also of Attorney Sarmiento and,
Yes.
well, we spoke to
We talked to Attorney
Cayosa
Sarmiento of the College of Law, Dean ng College of Law ng St. Lasal Bacolod, and we also talked to Domingo Cayosa, dating IBP President. Same things, basically. Dagdag na lang doon was that the issue of Parliament, 2 issues kasi. One is yung whether the ICC warrant is of any value, and number 2 is whether there is such a thing as parliamentary immunity in this case. Now, parliamentary immunity, of course, is governed by Article 11, Section 6 of the Constitution, which says that in 2 cases, when the Congress is in session, or when the punishment is 6 years, it's not above 6 years, then you have parliamentary immunity. It's not applicable law in this case because it's crimes against humanity. So any agreement that the Senate may want to invoke, which is, for example, tradition, is not covered by law. It's covered by courtesy. So it's not enforceable. So for example, sabi ni Domingo Cayosa, kung gugustuhin ng gobyerno na lusubin ang Senado, if government wants to do that,
they can.
They can. Nothing stopped
And
them.
it's been done, actually.
It's been, well,
hindi man lusob. Huwag mong sabihin para
I know
namang...
you're referring to the case of Laila de Lima and
Trillanes.
yeah. After one night, si Laila surrendered herself. So she stayed only 1 night. Trillanes, after so many days, also surrendered himself in the Senate premises while the Senate was in session. So, kumbaga, the argument of tradition does not really hold much
And if
legal
you
water.
were a senator, shouldn't you do just that?
Well, that is for them to have. But yeah, if you ask Father Aquino, you ask Domingo Cayosa, you ask Dean Raul Sarmiento, they all say the same thing. It's part of the responsibility of those who are in government, senior public officials, to show that they are not above the law.
Now, let's talk about the serving of the arrest warrant by the NBI, and now the DILG saying it's still not enforceable. So, alin ba sino ba ang tama dun sa dalawa?
That is what makes it so interesting. Kasi remember, in 2025, yung kaso ni Digong, yes, there was an ICC arrest warrant, but what government served was the diffusion notice of the Interpol. Because at that particular point, the government had been saying for the past 2 years na we do not recognize anymore the ICC, but we will recognize an Interpol diffusion notice or red notice because we are still part of the Interpol but not part of the ICC. So may ganung maneuverings ang gobyerno during that time.
Ngayon, can that still hold water?
That is interpretation of up to the interpretation of the government. Kasi during that time, the administration was saying we don't recognize ICC. If government now says that we do recognize ICC arrest warrants, then it may, I suppose, it may then apply that the same principle it did with Interpol. Yun lang, merong hindi pa, but I don't think they're in the same chat group. Kasi you have
Because John Vic, who is
NBI versus John Vic.
Yeah.
But the Interpol coordinates with the PNP.
Well,
Or does it also
the
do so
Interpol
with
has
the
an
NBI?
office. The Interpol also has an office with NBI. Interpol also coordinates with the Office of
PCTC.
Transnational Crime.
Which is under the PNP.
So in both cases, you have very close coordination. Ang question lang is whether whether government will give any credence to an Interpol or an ICC document. Kung saan siya magbibigay ng ano.
if we believe, for example, the ILG Secretary John Vic Remulla, he says he's waiting for that diffusion notice, which means he is more keen to follow what happened last year when they took former President Rodrigo Duterte.
Apparently, ganun kasi may precedents na.
Correct. But if we believe also former Senator Sonny Trillanes that the NBI also came with a warrant and what he showed us was just a copy of it, then the NBI also tried to serve it yesterday.
And the
that's
ICC says it has issues.
Yeah.
So it's clearly
an ICC
it's clearly a document that is
warrant.
recognized and legitimate from the ICC. Ang question na lang is whether the executive, which I suppose at this point has the presumption of regularity, will enforce which document. Again, you go to presumption of regularity until or unless there is an order from the Supreme Court, for example, or a higher court.
Can't we assume that what happened yesterday, because the NBI was there, of course, being part of the executive, then we would assume that maybe they had chosen that route to take, right, instead of the other, the diffusion Interpol.
Which is nga my
Which
point
is
mukhang wala silang isang
nga,
thread. Either way, I suppose either way, it all depends on the guy deciding for the executive. Yun lang, mukhang hindi sila kakasundo kung ano yung
And
desisyon.
who is this guy?
And who is this guy?
Well, you'd presume it's Malacanang. Or
The Executive Secretary.
Yes, or
the
maybe the Interior Secretary because he's in charge of the police, or the
two
Justice
different
Secretary
people?
who's in charge of the
The
NBI. They're both cabinet members, but they all report to the president. So,
We
is it
also heard Senator Bato de la Rosa appealing to President Marcos himself, right, Bok, for protection. But what kind of protection can Malacanang actually give the good senator in this kind of situation?
Well, you go back to RA 9851, which is the law on the crimes against humanity. That's the local law that they passed nung panahon ni GMA. What that law says is the government may, again, the critical word is may. Government, maybe it's better if I read it na lang. The government may surrender, maybe surrender is the wrong word Teka ha.
Sige, alam mo, attorney.
Attorney Bok.
No, I'm reading
No,
from the
no,
law.
I know, I'm just teasing.
Ito. Okay. Relevant Philippine authorities may dispense with the investigation or prosecution of a crime punishable under this act if another court or tribunal, international tribunal, is conducting the investigation. So the critical word is may. It doesn't have to, but it may if it wants to. So to your question now, whether government is required to, I suppose you might take the cue from the word may. On the other hand, you also have obligations pa rin with, for example, the Interpol. Kung merong diffusion notice ang Interpol and you're part of the Interpol, then you also have obligations
And of course, in the interest of justice of the victims of the drug war.
Yes, well, that's the ideal. But you know how it is sometimes with all the negotiations.
There's another monkey wrench in here, which is that the Senate, under the new Senate President, Alan Peter Cayetano, has said, I will honor it as long as galing siya sa local court. So have we done away with that whole having to pass through the local courts bit?
Two things Number one is the precedent from last year. The example from last year. Also the same argument, there is a requirement daw, as far as the Duterte lawyers are concerned, that it has to come from a local court. I mean, the warrant of arrest. Not the ICC, because we are not members of the ICC anymore. The Supreme Court has not acted on that petition from last year going into 1 year and 2 months. So that might be a signal for you as to, number one, the temperature in the Supreme Court on this issue. Number two, whether the Supreme Court finds it an urgent matter to decide on. And number three, whether it will act the same way
But of course,
in this
it's
case.
moot. In the case of the former president, it's moot.
But also, part of the petition from last year is for the Supreme Court to make the decision to prevent any future cases like this with the ICC. That was part of the petition. So the presumption, I suppose, would be na para pigilan ang mga hinaharap na ganitong problema with Senator Bato and possibly with Senator Bongo. But it's not been acted on. So that's also an interesting point.
Well, Bok, earlier, Attorney Torreon also mentioned that if there is no relief from the Supreme Court, they will try another remedy. I mean, what are the other available remedies still there for Senator
Maliban
Bato?
sa Supreme Court, I can't imagine any more. But then again, lawyers always find a way. But the Supreme Court is the highest court already. If the Supreme Court does not act on it, what do you do? Do you go to the Court of Appeals? Or do you go to an RTC? Parang...
Baliktad yata yun.
Baliktad yun.
Or just really live in the Senate and never set
But that's the
outside.
other thing as
Until
well.
June 4.
Kasi,
June 4.
oo, kasi the Senate goes on recess.
Yeah.
But then again, if you
So
also...
the immunity doesn't extend.
But even then, even
it's no
with
longer
the Senate in session...
supposed immunity.
There's no
Even-
immunity now.
Yeah.
Supposed immunity.
Kasi
sorry.
it's beyond 6 years, imprisonment
exactly.
if you follow the punishment for
So
no,
when
for
you think
crimes
about
against
it, Bok, there's
humanity.
actually nothing stopping law enforcement.
That was the point of Attorney Cayosa yesterday. If government wanted to, and it has the power to, there's the presumption of regularity. Barring any TRO from the Supreme Court, they can just go in and then bring him out. Yung nga lang, the optics would be very, very bad.
They just wanted to diffuse the situation yesterday.
Yeah.
And
I'd imagine that too.
Let
Pero
it
kasi nga,
breathe.
ano itsura nun if you have a whole army of PNP SAF going in and holding Bato out. And of course, you can imagine the senators will also have their own drama na may magpipigil, may iiyak, at may mga sisigaw. And, si Bato lang kahapon.
And because we also saw what the optics that came out of March 11, 2025.
Yes.
That was pretty terrible. Batuhan, hablutan.
And you notice as well the effect on the ratings of number one of Sara Duterte and number two of BBM.
And the
So
midterm
gumanon siya.
results, midterm elections.
There you go, the midterm results as well. So those are things that I suppose that they would also want to consider, although they should not be of the greatest import, but they are part of the political atmosphere.
so it's a battle of wills this time.
Yeah, and
And
optics
patience,
and narratives.
patience.
Kasi you can also imagine, kung magkagulo sa Senado, you might have people converging there. Which is something
From both camps.
from both, but more specifically sa camp ng mga pro-Duterte.
All right. We thank you for joining us. Attorney Edling.
I am not learning. I just talked to a lot of lawyers.
Yes, thank you so much for providing some clarity to the goings on
I try to
in the
digest
past over 24 hours. Thank you.
All right, well, we're just going to take a quick break, but coming up, former President Rodrigo Duterte has a new lead counsel. We tell you more about Peter Haynes when the big story returns. Keep it here.
The big story is back with legal luminaries urging the Senate to immediately proceed with the impeachment trial of Vice President Sara Duterte. They warn any delay could violate the Constitution. In a joint statement, the legal scholars praised the House for approving the impeachment complaint but criticized what they called brazen attempts to delay the trial. They stressed that the Senate's refusal to sit as an impeachment court would constitute a dereliction of duty and a violation of the Constitution. The statement came after the Senate leadership shakeup that installed Senator Alan Peter Cayetano as Senate President. That happened on the same day the House impeached Duterte. Meanwhile, the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines also called on senators to follow the constitutional process and proceed with the impeachment trial without delay. The Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry echoed that call, saying the country needs to move forward while ensuring due process is followed.
What we need to know now as the country is trying to reel out of this crisis, we can't have any more distractions. What we're requesting is always go by the rules of law. Let's look so at least we build credibility not only to our Filipinos but also to the world that whatever happens in the Philippines, there's still rule of law and we do it fast and we do it for the country. It should happen. Forthwith is we have to do it.
Meantime, the House of Representatives has formally named its 11-member prosecution panel for the Duterte impeachment trial. The team includes Representatives Jervin Luistro, Keith Flores, Bel Zamora, Lawrence Defensor, Joel Chua, Laila De Lima, Chel Diokno, Terry Ridon, Rog Gutierrez, Kaka Bagao, and Lordan Suan. The panel is expected to present and defend the articles of impeachment once trial begins at the Senate. Now let's get insights on this topic with Professor Paulo Tamase of the UP College of Law. Good evening. Welcome to the Big Story.
Good evening.
All these statements seem to indicate that there is this fear that the Senate will not be doing its job with this change of leadership despite assurances by the new Senate President Alan Peter Cayetano. What is your own assessment?
I think there's reason for the public to suspect whether there would actually be a trial and a trial forthwith, if only because the majority in power now is the same majority that was in power during the last attempted impeachment. And you saw in the last impeachment how certain members of the majority, in particular Senator Alan Peter Cayetano, is now the Senate President, maneuvered using new constitutional or extra-constitutional devices like a remand to the House of Representatives to delay the trial or effectively delay the trial against the Vice President then. But I'm also, I think, relying on certain public statements made by Senate President Cayetano, which committed to the trial continuing. So I think the question more is not whether the trial will actually happen. It's first, how soon it will happen. And second is if there can be some assurance that despite the open alliance of the members of the majority with the Vice President, that the trial can proceed fairly.
For instance, we had Senator Bato de la Rosa risking arrest just to cast his vote, and is now, in the Senate until he fixes his legal issues. But can the Senate be a safe house? Can it be regarded as a refuge for someone who is supposed to be answerable to the law?
There's an answer in the constitutional text and history, and there's also an answer in the practice of the Senate. So when we look at the constitutional text, the privilege that senators have from being arrested while Senate is in session only applies to offenses that have a maximum penalty of 6 years. Now, of course, the penalty in the crimes against humanity charged versus Senator Dela Rosa in an international court are simply outside of what is contemplated in the constitutional text, simply because that mechanism did not exist yet when the 87 Constitution was written. But in any event, if you look at the spirit behind that provision, the spirit of that parliamentary immunity or that immunity from arrest is not to give privilege to a senator, but really to preserve his right to participate in the Senate if he is only being charged for minor offenses, so that the minor offenses cannot be used to harass that senator and forbid him from participating.
We must point out, sorry to interrupt, that it's actually that to prevent harassment of a senator from doing a good job, from performing his legislative functions and crafting policy. Pero
yes,
it's seen as the reverse, like some kind of entitlement?
Yes, and again, the provision was never meant to be an immunity or a blanket immunity. In fact, adjustments to the text of the 1987 Constitution made it clear that it would only be limited to these minor offenses. And therefore, the intent is to actually keep senators like ordinary citizens accountable to criminal process or accountable to legal process. And therefore, the perspective should be whether criminal case is being used to harass a particular senator and prevent him from performing his or her functions, or it's simply just the consequence of being charged with an offense. The second thing we can look at is the practice of the Senate. And in the last administration, you had two senators who were in fact arrested while they were in the Senate, or were served a warrant of arrest while they were in the Senate. That's Senator Laila de Lima and Senator Trillanes. Both of them did not make a ruckus while they were in the Senate session. Of course, both of them were also served with Philippine warrants, which I think Senator Dela Rosa's side would want to distinguish. But in any event, both accepted, even despite the wide consensus among academics, civil society, that in the cases of Senator De Lima especially, the case was for harassment, but nevertheless complied with the legal processes and ended up acquitting herself, or showing that she was not guilty of the drug charges filed against her. So both of those things, the constitutional text and the Senate practice, can be guides for the Senate on how to proceed with this particular issue with Senator Bato.
As it is, currently, Attorney Tamase, Senator Bato is under Senate protective custody, just like Curly Descaya is, just as Cassandra Leong was. Do you think that's a bit unorthodox? And when it comes to Senate rules versus, the Constitution and the rule of law, how do we balance these two against each other?
I think it's incredibly unorthodox in the sense that orders, for example, to protect certain witnesses like the Curly Descaya and Ong. Those are examples of the Senate giving them protection to maintain its power to conduct inquiry, which is further to its power to make laws. But extending a protection to a certain senator who is really a fugitive from international criminal law, if you want to put it that way, I don't think I've seen that before. In fact, you look at past practice to suggest that when there is a process already, the Senate tends to comply upon coordination with law enforcement bodies from the executive department. So it's a bit unorthodox to see what's happening in the Senate now. The protective custody is itself already unorthodox, but I think the way that this was done yesterday, which included contempt orders against the NBI arresting officers, that was even more unorthodox than how it would normally proceed.
Well, Attorney, many legal luminaries have already said that parliamentary immunity does not apply in the case of Senator Bato de la Rosa. But with that said, can a case be filed against the Senate as an institution for harboring a fugitive or for obstruction of justice?
I'm not prepared yet to go that far, simply because the technicalities of this case being really an international criminal law case pending before an international tribunal may present complexities that would not be present if this were purely a domestic matter. The reality is that criminal laws are not easily, or criminal prosecution is not easily filed, right? And there's some a high bar that needs to be met before somebody's actually considered to have violated criminal law, including obstruction of justice. So I'm not prepared to go that far. There might be legal excuses for the Senate for what it did, but I think that notwithstanding, it is, with all due respect, unbecoming on the part of the Senate to actually extend protections to a senator to the effect that it seems that the Senate is putting this senator above the rule of law. If it's clear that there's an international criminal law warrant against this person, then at the very least, it is incumbent on the Senate to let the process play out, right? Instead of actively seeking to lawyer for Senator De La Rosa, who I think has enough resources and capabilities to defend himself and therefore insulate the Senate as an institution from charges of it, not complying with law itself.
What about tweaking certain Senate laws to be able to accommodate, whatever the new majority wants? Pawi, I think we were discussing this earlier. Go ahead.
Yeah, Attorney, you have Senator Marcoleta proposing a change in the rule requiring senators to be physically present during sessions and participating in sessions. And now it seems that senators would be allowed to participate virtually anywhere because of this proposed amendment. What are your thoughts on that? And what are the potential dangers of that?
So, technology has really progressed from the time when the original Senate rules were written, particularly when the rules in the Constitution itself were written concerning physical presence of senators. I will say first that this is not unprecedented. You do see remote voting, remote participation options already present in other legislatures. The easiest example for us is the United States. During COVID, the House of Representatives passed a rule change that would allow them to vote remotely. But that rule change was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, withdrawn eventually when things returned to normal. So remote voting in this day and age might well be a good policy, actually. It ensures that a senator will be present in debate and that the persons who voted for that senator are represented in that debate. I think what makes it dangerous is when the rule change is obviously to accommodate another consideration. And I'm not saying that Senator Marcoleta's rule change was precisely to accommodate a situation where Senator Dela Rosa can hide and still participate in Senate hearings, Senate plenary sessions through video conferencing and remote voting. But you also cannot remove that suspicion from the public. That suspicion is fair on the part of the public because of what they saw yesterday.
Now, what do you anticipate to be legal tumblings, maneuverings that can be done to prevent immediate action on the impeachment complaint after, let's say, it's already transmitted to the Senate? We didn't know about remanding then, and it happened. But what else? What do you see as happening?
I'll deal with the most obvious, for me, objection. I think the one that might be raised is the fact that there are pending petitions in the Supreme Court to question the proceedings in the House of Representatives. But the legal answer to that, and just to acknowledge that despite the political character of impeachment, you can expect legal argument to really rule or to define this issue. The legal response to it is that unless the Supreme Court has issued a TRO or a status quo ante order against the Senate, not against the House, but against the Senate, then there is nothing for the Senate to take notice of, and nothing that would stop the Senate from its duty to proceed with the trial. The other objections you can expect would be similar to what we saw last year. So while this is following the regular mode of impeachment, which goes to the Committee on Justice, there were a couple of times, if you would notice, due process objections raised. And while I think those due process objections are much, much weaker than last year, it's enough, I think, the fact that they exist, imagine as an imagination, will be enough to already, or might provide for some ammo on the part of the Senate if it indeed did not wish to push through with the trial.
Congressman Terry Redon points out that there is a pending motion filed before the Supreme Court which makes the Senate a respondent. Is that, he cites that it could be potentially risky because even if the Senate was not yet, it hasn't received the articles of impeachment yet, but it was made a respondent in a case filed by the party of the Vice President.
So if that were the case, and with just the caveat that I have not seen that motion or perhaps that supplemental petition, the initial problem, and just providing for academic commentary, the initial problem with that would be that that petition would have been filed before there would actually be an actual case or controversy, which is a requisite for the court to participate in these kinds of reviews. And the emergence, the later emergence of an actual case when it is eventually filed with the Senate will not cure the fact that it was filed before the Senate received the petition. So you can see a few legal hurdles there. But I think ultimately, just based on what has happened in the last few weeks, we can expect one of the four petitioners before the Supreme Court now to supplement their petition and include the Senate as a party once the articles of impeachment have been transmitted to the upper chamber.
Last question, Attorney, very quickly. That supplemental affidavit by Ramil Madriaga, a lot of, back and forth between whether or not it should have been admitted and if he should have been allowed to read it in the House. What is your academic perspective on that?
None of these would affect, none of what was presented in the House affects what can be presented in the Senate. So first, there is no rule in the Senate rules which says that only evidence that has been presented in the House can be brought in the Senate. Any issues concerning their admissibility, whether they can be taken on by the Senate, would be considered anew once the impeachment trial proceeds to the upper chamber. But the second is that I think we need to exercise a bit of caution when it comes to the evaluation of these pieces of evidence before the Senate. It's a good reminder at this point that the impeachment proceedings before it are not really strictly legal proceedings. They are not before the traditional courts. They are really filed before an elected body of politicians. And the evidence that will be persuasive to them and the evidence that will be persuasive to the public might not necessarily conform to the strict rules of admissibility that would apply to courts. And it's a good reminder at this point where you have the House prosecutors being announced or the House managers being announced that it'll be interesting to see which of the managers were presented to provide for really legal acumen, trial skill, and which ones are presented to converse with the public. Because that's what you tend to see in impeachments. There are two conversations ongoing, one within the Senate and one outside.
All right, we thank you for talking to us and giving us your academic perspective. Professor Paolo Tamase of the UP College of Law.
All right, still on the Dutertes, former President Rodrigo Duterte's daughter, Kitty, has filed another motion before the Supreme Court. The motion, filed through her legal counsel, Attorney Paulo Panelo, urged the SC once more to act on their consolidated petitions for habeas corpus and to facilitate the return of Digong from The Hague. It emphasized that more than 1 year had passed since the petitions were filed, yet no substantive action has been made. It highlighted Senate Resolution number 44, where the upper house expressed its sense to protect all Filipinos from extrajudicial rendition. The petition also cited the dramatic turn of events in the Senate on May 11, where Senator Bato de la Rosa dodged an ICC arrest warrant. Panelo said a decision should have been made by now, accusing the executive on capitalizing on the SC's silence to allegedly perpetrate the same grave constitutional violations that they complained about. Meantime, on to another Duterte daughter. Vice President Sara Duterte is still in The Hague visiting her detained father. She gave an update on Digong's health and at the same time shared a conversation that they had about relationships.
Okay lang siya. Nabalitaan ko siya sa mga nangyari sa Pilipinas, maliban na lang dun sa may kinalaman sa ICC. Majority ng aming pinag-usapan ngayon ay patungkol sa pag-aasawa. Agree kaming dalawa na para magkaroon ng successful na pagsasama ang mag-asawa, kailangan hiwalay ang kanilang kwarto. Magiging harmonious at peaceful ang pamamahay kung hiwalay ang kwarto ng mag-asawa.
Meanwhile, former President Rodrigo Duterte has a new lead counsel. In the document showing the withdrawal of Duterte's attorney, Nicholas Kaufman, is the name of the new counsel, Peter Haynes. Kaufman also said in his filing that Haynes assured attendance at the first status conference for the case on May 27, 2026. Haynes is a prominent British barrister specializing in international criminal and humanitarian law, known for his extensive work before international tribunals in The Hague. He was president of the ICC Bar Association from 2019 to 2021. And among his most notable achievements was securing the acquittal of the former Vice President of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Jean-Pierre Bemba, from war crimes and crimes against humanity in 2018. At Haynes' first hearing for Duterte, judges will aim to set a definitive start date for the trial. They will also discuss how the evidence submitted by the prosecution and the defense will be disclosed and managed. The trial proper could begin between September 2026 and February 2027.
This is still a big story on One News, and coming up, still a lot going on at the Senate. On the sidelines, an embattled lawmaker was seen crying while two other senators got into a heated debate. We have details next. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the big story. Former Senate President Tito Sotto says another leadership change is still possible. He said the upper chamber has a long history of leadership shakeups, himself part of 8 shuffles in the past. For him, yesterday's thin 13-vote majority could allow for a shift in the balance of power, depending on issues, alliances, and the personal stand of senators.
Pwedeng magpalit considering yung number, diba?
Well, it has happened before. You know, I have been in leadership change for 8 times. 8 times na ako eh.
So you're not
Mula kay
affected?
Neptali hanggang sa ngayon, pang-8 ito eh. So, merong madalas na manipis. Merong panahon ni Nene Pimentel, 13 lang kami. 11 kami, naging 13 kami. Tapos naging 11 din kami.
So sir, pag ganun manipis,
May nangyayari.
pag ganun manipis, mabilis ang pwedeng pagpapalit ulit ng leadership.
Depende. Depende sa mga magiging issue, depende sa mga mga kapwa senador. Depende sa mga paninindigan. Di ba?
Saan may letter?
Sabi ko nga ako naman
Saan may letter si...
graduate ako sa Neptali Gonzalez School of Politics eh. Sabi nga niya, di ba? Loyalty, friendship, the word given sometimes is of no moment. Lahat mayroong kanyang agenda or...
Meanwhile, political pundit Ronald Llamas told our sister program Storycon that he would not be surprised if another leadership change happens as early as next week. He noted the majority's slim numbers and pointed to the possibility some senators could face legal troubles. His remarks came on the same day the Ombudsman confirmed receiving the Senate Blue Ribbon report recommending cases over the flood control controversy. Named in the report are Senators Joel Villanueva and Jinggoy Estrada, who are now part of the new majority bloc.
Hindi ako magugulat kung baka next week magkaroon uli ng leadership change.
Saan? Sa Senado? Sa Kongreso?
Sa Senado.
Dahil muna sabi yan?
Yan ang nipis kasi, 13 lang eh.
Bagay, no?
Dalawa lang ang bumaliktad doon, di ba? Bago na naman, di ba?
Yung dalawa
Yung
pa...
nag-abstain pa.
Ikalawa.
Abstain, yung dalawa.
Oo, ikalawa.
Abstain pa.
Ikalawa, may dalawang senador na nasa preliminary investigation na. Ibig sabihin, hinug na yon para isang pasasandigan bayan. Non-bailable yon. Tanggal sila dyan. At kung magbobotohan uli sa Senate President,
you have to be present.
You have to be present.
And still at the upper chamber, developments continue to unfold following the leadership shakeup that installed Senator Alan Peter Cayetano as new Senate President. Former Senate President Tito Sotto said he has no hard feelings toward fellow Senator Loren Legarda, despite her decision to join the new majority bloc that backed Cayetano. Legarda was among 4 senators who switched sides along with Senators Pia Cayetano, Camille Villar, and Mark Villar.
Nagtataka lang ako. Ganun lang.
Nagpaalam na siya sa'yo,
Hindi pa.
Meanwhile, tensions flared during Tuesday's plenary session after Senator Robin Padilla called out Senator Kiko Pangilinan for raising his voice. That was during the debate over the arrest warrant issued by the International Criminal Court against Senator Bato de la Rosa. Senate President pro tempore Loren Legarda temporarily suspended the session as fellow senators moved to calm the situation.
Gusto ko lamang pong ibalita sa ating mga kasama na naging maganda po ang responde ng Commission on Human Rights sapagkat kaninang umaga po nakipagpulong sila sa atin at nakipagpulong po sila sa USAA at kay Senator Bato de la Rosa patungkol po sa nangyari na karahasan at pang-aabuso sa karapatang pantao ng ating mga kasama dito sa Senado. Pangalawa, gusto ko lamang din pong iparating sa ating mga taong bayan na magkakaiba po ang kaso ni Senator Trillanes at Senator De Lima sa kaso po ni Senator Bato. Dahil si Senator Bato, ang warrant po niya ay hindi galing sa Pilipinas. Ang warrant po niyan ay galing sa ibang bansa, sa isang dayuhang korte. Ito po.
All right, and our big picture tonight is still coming out of the Senate. Senator Bato de la Rosa turned emotional during Tuesday's Senate session, a day after the ICC confirmed an arrest warrant against him. De la Rosa was seen wiping his tears while speaking to Senator Bongo inside the session hall. The former PNP chief admitted he has not been able to sleep well since the warrant was issued. De la Rosa also shared that his family, including his wife, children, and grandchildren, have been deeply affected by the developments. The senator is currently staying inside the Senate under the chamber's protective custody after NBI agents attempted to serve the ICC warrant yesterday.
There's still so many happenings on this Tuesday, and it beats any teleserye so far. But we will be keeping a close eye on this, close watch on this. But for tonight, that's it for the big story this Tuesday. Thank you so much for watching.
And as promised, we're back here tomorrow at 8 p.m. We'll see you then.
Kapatid, we are One News, all sides, all the time. Have a good night.